Welcome to Marketecture, where you can get smart fast with in-depth interviews of leading technology vendors. I'm Ari Paparo. I'm joined today by Mathieu Roche from ID5. Thank you for being here. Did I pronounce your name correctly?
Perfect. As good as it can get. Well, thanks for having me, and congrats on launching this great initiative.
I appreciate it. Hopefully, we'll get a lot out of this conversation. So why don't we start by you introducing your company and yourself and give us some of the basics.
Sure. So I'm Mathieu Roche. I'm the CEO of ID5. And ID5 is an identity company, 4 years old now, created in late 2017, originally in Europe. We're now 40 people across Europe and the US. And our mission as a company is to support digital advertising by making identity work in a post-cookie, post-made, privacy-first world. Identity is obviously a very important part of what makes digital advertising valuable for brands and publishers, what makes those transactions work better than, analog or let's say traditional media. And we've been working as an industry with kind of historical methods that are either no longer available or no longer suitable. And so our job is to really kind of build a better infrastructure for advertising to work on top of.
So let's dive into the product. And this is pretty abstract. Like, it's not a UI you can log into. It's not a workflow. You can't demo it.
No.
But I want to make sure that our listeners and the people watching this really understand what it is.
Sure.
So I guess to tee it up, in the old world, anyone who had a tag on the page could read and write their own identity through a cookie. That was anonymous or pseudo-anonymous. And then they also could potentially bridge that to something less anonymous, like an email address or other PII in the old-fashioned way of talking about it. Tell me now, in this new world, ID5 is an ID, and it's a universal ID across all the parties in the transaction.
Yeah, so it's interesting. The world that you described is the world of autonomous identification, as we like to say, because platforms, right, people operating advertising transaction, buyers and sellers, are third parties to the page on which the ad is going to be served, right? And as third party, you were able in the past to autonomously identify users by using maids or cookies on your own, almost, right? Like without having to ask for permission or without having any technical limitations, right? And so we come from this place of autonomous identification where everybody had their own ability to differentiate one device from another, right? And with the deprecation of cookies, with the deprecation of mobile ad IDs, we're getting into a world where, as a third party, you're really a second-class citizen when it comes to accessing the site. And so you cannot autonomously identify users anymore. You have to be told who they are, right?
Right. You're on the outside.
That's the shift.
You're on the outside looking in.
Exactly.
Now.
That's the shift that's happened. That's happening, and that's going to happen over the next 4 years. It's this inability of people to autonomously retrieve their own ID, right? And so that shift means that you have to tell them, the page has to tell them who the user is, who the device is, right?
Yep.
And to do this, you need kind of a consistent identification method on as many devices, as many sites as possible. And you need a universal language, right? A notion of currency, because not only do people need to be able to read it, but they need to be able to use this identification method to share information with each other. And that's where the notion of currency really becomes relevant. It's a means of transacting. It's a means of collecting information on customers, and it's a means of transacting information between platforms on those customers. So that's the shift that's happening right now. And that's why what we do becomes relevant, because in the past, right, why do you need people to tell you a user? You could just read it from yourself, right? You could kind of try to find other information that you didn't have. You could source email address to kind of tie your cookie to an email address. You could source profile information, right, to enrich your understanding of a customer. But basically, you could know that this device, right, is always the same device using cookies and mobile ad IDs. Now you can't anymore.
Yeah, so let's talk about how your product solves this problem, because it's a really daunting problem. The problem itself is, I would say, unsolvable at a perfect level. Like, we can never perfectly know every user in every environment. So it's a question about how close you can get.
Yeah.
So I guess the best place to start would be, in a web browser, a user goes to a publisher's website, and I assume your tag is on that page.
Yeah. So a browser logs onto a website, right? So access a web page. That page is connected to us either through tag or server side and passes us what we call signals that we resolve into an ID, right?
Okay.
And those signals can be an email address if the user has logged in, a phone number, or some form of like what we call hard signals, so some form of information that will enable for deterministic identification, right? Ari Paparo at Marketecture.com, right? If you see on two different sites, we know that you're the same user, right?
It's Marketecture, but .tv, just FYI.
Okay, sorry, my bad. So, right, if we see that information, that's one of the signals that we get from the sites. They pass us emails of users who've logged in. They pass us other type of deterministic or information that we're able to use for deterministic matching. And then they also pass us what we call soft signals, which are signals that will be processed through an algorithm so that we can guess with a high enough level of confidence that, yes, because you have this IP address, you were on that site at that time of the day, you have this user agent or this kind of, set of characteristic on your machine, we recognize you as being the same one with a high enough level of confidence, right?
Right.
So our job is to take all of those signals, and we take 10 billion signals a day. So we have a huge coverage of devices and websites and apps. Take those signals and resolve them into an ID that we then provide back to the site. And then what the site does with that ID is that it shares it with their SSP, their DMP, a CDP, et cetera, so that those platforms who are third-party servers to the site have an ID to work with and to do what they do, which can be profiling, which can be frequency capping, monetization, attribution, measurement, targeting, et cetera, et cetera.
So is it a centralized database of all the IDs that you have?
Yes. I mean, it's technically decentralized in a cloud infrastructure, but it is one central repository of signal that we look up to then determine what is the ID of that particular, that corresponds to that particular set of signals.
Elephant in the room. Privacy. Okay.
Favorite topic.
You mentioned IP addresses. You're creating an ID that's centralized. It sounds an awful lot like you're a controller and that you need consent in GDPR land for doing what you're doing. I'll start there. What's your point of view on that?
We are, and we do.
Okay, you're a controller, right? So a publisher needs to get
they need to disclose
consent.
Absolutely, they need to disclose to the users that we are processing personal data for them and what purpose we are processing that data for, and they need to get users to agree and so to consent for us to do that. Yes, absolutely.
Okay, and then you're then passing that ID to other parties, to SSPs, DSPs, et cetera. How does the consent layer on to those transactions?
So that's where we basically take into consideration our own legal basis. So we read the consent information that we receive and we read the entire consent string, right? So who else has consent for processing personal data? And that's the basis on which we encrypt the ID, right? So if you say, again, DSP1 has consent, but DSP2 does not have consent, the string that we provide, the ID string that we provide, is decryptable by ID1, but not by ID2.
Okay.
So we enforce that kind of consent preferences, those preferences expressed by users, so that only DSP1 is able to use the ID and so to overlay data and use personal data for that given user, and DSP2 isn't. Similarly, the graph will be filtered on IDs that have been consented to for the different clients to which we deliver it.
Thanks for listening. To hear the complete interview, subscribe at marketecture.tv.